Welcome to the Patreon for Crescent City Crime. This is Crescent City Crime Goes to the Movies. Hello, dear listeners. I'm Tracy.
And I'm Brian.
Welcome to everybody who has been along this journey with us. If you're new here, then welcome. We appreciate you listening.
Welcome aboard, and we enjoy talking to you.
Of course, all of our social media things will be in the show notes, so make sure that you follow us or like our YouTube channel or come join us in the Facebook group, however you prefer to do it. And of course, tell your friends about us. Tell all of your friends. Send us out into a group text. But most importantly,
tell your enemies about us, especially your enemies.
And make sure it's your enemies in the group text as well.
That's right.
And, of course, subscribe to us on your preferred podcasting platform. We're everywhere. And we also are on YouTube. So if you would like to follow us there, give our videos some likes, give us some subscriptions, we'd appreciate that. So today we are talking about the movie Dead Man Walking, which stars Susan Sarandon as Sister Helen Prejean and Sean Penn as Matthew Ponsolitz. His character is based on a combination of Elmo Saunier and Robert Lee Willie, who we had previously discussed on this podcast. And when this movie came out, it was considered groundbreaking. It helped to ignite that national debate about the death penalty. Should we have it? Should we not have it? Is it right to kill somebody just because the state is doing it? Many people in this day and age, and this is, from a perspective of about 20 or 30 years now, 30 years later, it's like we're slowly inching towards accepting that it is not right for the state to execute somebody.
Yeah, and we're even reaching the point to where it's becoming practical because the so-called humane lethal injection has been unenforceable.
Right, because who can actually complain? The person who is getting injected has died.
Yeah, it is. It is. In some ways, it's kind of silly, but now it seems practically none of the pharmaceutical companies want to be associated with executing people. So none of the companies that previously supplied this drug to the state of Louisiana in this case will continue supplying it. So they can't. The state of Louisiana has not been able to carry out lethal injections for quite some time.
Yes, exactly. And this is
how many? 30 years.
I think it was 2003 or 2002
was the last execution.
So yes, it has been a while, and as we are recording this episode today, there is that bill that we mentioned in the state of Louisiana to abolish the death penalty. Hearings about that have been heard today during the Louisiana legislative session. Of course, we will update you on whatever happens. Unfortunately, I do think it is a hard sell in the state of Louisiana, though, especially to the politicians that we currently have running the state.
Yes, they'll try to spin it as being soft on crime.
Right. But really, if somebody is in jail for life without the possibility of parole, that's a person who's being kept away from society. Okay? You can't get any more kept away from society than life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Especially in Angola. Good luck escaping death row in Angola.
Mm-hmm. Well, the film starts off showing Sister Helen in her humble surroundings, which is a housing project. And of course, for those of you who are not familiar, if you watch this movie and when you see that housing project, that is a pre-Katrina housing project.
The bricks.
The bricks. Yes.
Yep.
These days, the housing projects, like after Katrina came and went and destroyed a lot of the projects, they actually built them up to be really nice in the aftermath. Like you look at them, you don't even think that they're projects.
No, that they look like apartments.
Yes, they look like apartments. It is a much better. At least I feel like it's a much better place to be these days than it was back then. Um, there was a frequent police activity and criminal activity, et cetera, et cetera. And these days, they're a little bit more tighter on the restrictions. I don't think any major crimes have happened in one of the new projects. Just as a side note.
No, they're quite safe, and food delivery people have been quite safe making deliveries to these new housing projects.
Now, of course, Sister Helen does get asked to correspond with Matthew Poncelet, and through the movie, she gets more and more involved with Matthew. He tells her that his lawyer for his capital murder case was a tax attorney who had no trial experience, but he was his attorney because he didn't cost anything.
So he was volunteering as a public defender?
Yes, but you have to admit that's pretty dire, right? I mean, if your life is on the line like that, you need an experienced trial attorney. You can't just have a tax attorney. To me, that's appalling.
It kind of sounds like something out of a
comedy
involving like cast members from SNL, SCTV. I could see Eugene Levy in the role of the tax attorney who's defending someone on trial for murder.
Oh no! And yeah, and who's the current hot star? Oh, Harry Styles would be the murderer. But the sad part is that since I'm from Louisiana and I understand how backwards this state can be, when I first saw this movie and I heard that, I was like, that actually makes sense for the state of Louisiana to just send a tax attorney.
Oh, sure. I mean, your typical Louisiana prosecutor doesn't really care about getting a fair trial.
No. And throughout the movie, the audience sees glimpses of the crime, but towards the end, as Matthew finally confesses to Sister Prejean what he's done, you do see the full scope and scale of what he actually did. And, spoiler alert, he was actually guilty. And Brian has mentioned this point before in one of the previous episodes, that the system worked as was intended. Okay. So in this particular case, in this particular movie, the system worked as was supposed to be intended. And this film, to me, the message that I really got from it, it felt like it was about grief more than anything else, because it had such a big impact on everyone. It had the inmates' families, the victims' families, Sister Prejean, just about everybody.
Yes, most definitely. The families were grieving the entire time that they were complaining about the murderer getting this assistance from the church.
Right.
And one of their grievances was that they weren't getting this same assistance, although that's typically there for someone, but you have to go to the church yourself.
Right.
You see. And so, your movement's not restricted, but the movement of someone who is being incarcerated is heavily restricted. So a representative of the church has to come to them. Whoever's going to perform, or perform services for this person who's incarcerated has to come to them. They
Right.
can't leave the jail
Right.
to do any of this, and they shouldn't be permitted to leave the jail for any of this stuff.
Yes. Yeah, this movie is also one of those slow burn sort of movies where there's a build up, and the build up is of course the moment where you see Matthew Poncelet dying, and you see again the his full part in the crime. Like before that, you're kind of just, I don't know if you, as a person who has seen this movie, when you go through, or when the movie shows you all the procedures that they had to go through, you might be thinking to yourself, well, this is a lot of pre-trial, or not pre-trial, not, what would you call it, just hearings, pre-death phase hearings. What do you call it, Brian, where
Well, they're all called hearings that have different names.
right, but if you're a person who's on death row, clemency hearings, that's it, right? Because you're trying to plead for clemency.
Yes.
Okay. There we go. Yeah, so you're watching it, you're watching him go through all these clemency hearings, and it's kind of it was kind of heartbreaking for me on the most recent time that I watched it, to feel like, well, man, he really just didn't have a chance at all. And yes, that is a little bit of sympathy for somebody who was on death row. It's like, you have to go all the way through the end of your life trying to fight for it.
Well, the difference here between reading about this in a newspaper or online article or watching news coverage is that he's a character in a story in this movie.
Right.
So you're experiencing things along with the character in this movie, and it's as a human being, unless you're a sociopath, it's difficult not to empathize and identifying with the character in some way. Their conflict, their struggle,
Right.
regardless of who they are. Like for example, like say on a give the example of, let's say Jessica Jones. Okay, this
Marvel show.
This Marvel show. Okay, there's a villain on the show who is he's quite charming. He's a pretty good actor, and he finds himself caught between helping the hero to suit his own ends and helping one of two villains to suit his own ends. And because you see him struggling, and there's an assassination attempt on him from one of the villains, you kind of sympathize with his struggle to some point, and in this case, and of course, this is totally fictitious, I find myself kind of cheering for him a little bit.
Okay.
Just for example, so this is kind of along the same lines.
Interesting. Okay. Right. Well, the acting in this movie was amazing.
First rate.
Like there was a whole gauntlet of emotions, subtlety, depth to into the characterization as well. It's really is amazing to me that the 90s in particular were a really good period for movies. And this movie came out in the 90s. This was before we had CGI. This was before we had big spectacle blockbuster special effects festivals, right?
Yeah.
This was really a movie that is very story and character driven. And this is a type of movie that I really love.
And the characters are relatable, believable, quite real.
Very much so.
Yeah, the performances are very on point.
Very on point. And you know what else was on point was the chemistry between Susan Sarandon and Sean Penn. You know, that's something that you cannot really teach. That chemistry just has to be there.
Yes, it takes some good rehearsals
It does,
and
yes.
some bonding between the actors
Right.
to accomplish this, because quite frankly, uh, if there hadn't been this good chemistry and rapport between the two actors in this movie and them, being the central characters, it would have ruined the entire movie had that not been there.
You're right. It would have ruined it.
Audiences can forgive performances of minor characters being a little off,
Right.
but the central characters, no,
No.
you can't. That can't be overlooked, and that's the movie.
Right. That is the movie. Because the movie is ultimately about these two characters going through this process together. And it is a process. You go from the hearings to when, ultimately it was decided that he would not escape he would not escape the injections. He would in fact be going to die in the state penitentiary. And speaking of, the other thing that I did appreciate about this movie was just how, like, in terms of a set, just how bare it felt. Like, where Sister Prejean lived. Of course, she's a nun, right? So she's not going to have a lot of possessions. That's not really how nuns work. They do take a vow of poverty, meaning that they basically agree to live in poverty, that the church is going to provide for them, so they don't really have a lot of extra things with them.
Yes, because their life is their work.
Their life is their work. And then, of course, when you get into the scenes at Angola prison, I mean, prisoners aren't really allowed to have a lot of personal effects either.
No, in most instances, an inmate is going to have no more than what can fill. When you're talking about Angola, no more than what can fill a footlocker.
No more than can fill a footlocker.
That includes your clothing. That includes your toiletries. That includes any
books.
Yeah.
Or anything else. Pictures. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All that stuff. Yep. So you don't get a lot of things to really look at in the background or anything like that. And now in the movie, and this was something that I'm not sure which one it was. I think it was Robert Lee Willie who went on and declared himself a Nazi. He supported Hitler. He's a white supremacist. All these terrible things, right? And these are people that we as a society can find very difficult to love. Somebody who kills people and who is a person of who follows hateful ideologies.
Yeah, and it's what makes that so appalling is how these people understand how the Nazis were, these psychopaths, because the Nazis themselves were a collection of intellectual psychopaths,
mm-hmm.
a collection of evildoers who were empowered. So imagine how terrifying it is to have someone who is very much like this, someone who would be at home, someone who'd be at home in the Third Reich, someone who could have been easily recruited into the ranks of the SS, running around your city murdering people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, imagine how terrifying that is.
Yes, and right now I feel like with our current political situation in America. I feel like that these conversations are more important than ever. But yes, these conversations are more important than ever.
Yes, and it's. I personally believe that it's very important to learn about the rise of the Nazis during 1920s Germany and 1930s Germany and the Nazi government and the way they worked and how these people were, because they're
The Nazis
these
supported.
individuals are pure evil.
Yes.
And a study of the Nazis, once again, 1920s, 1930s Germany, and of course 1940s Germany as well, is a study of pure evil and how psychotic and evil individuals behave. How what they will do if they get empowered, how they can get recruited into organizations and empowered, because this was not some random occurrence. This can happen. This can happen on a micro scale in any city in the world, because in every city in the world you have a fraction of a percentage of the population who are these kinds of people.
Oh, and the Nazis supported the death penalty en masse. There was no hearings, there was no trials.
Not to mention summary executions.
Well, that's what I'm saying. No trials, no attorneys.
Like in the concentration, the early version of the concentration camps during the 30s, which were, of course, political prisons. I believe they called them internment camps then. Their SS officers would be tested in the concentration camps by having them torture these political prisoners, and in some case carry out summary executions.
Right.
So they could prove what they're capable of. And of course, the ones who readily tortured people and murdered prisoners were the point men during the infamous Night of the Long Knives, where several of the brown-shirted SS officers were rounded up and murdered in a political purge.
A political purge, and again, no judge, no jury, nothing like that.
No, just psychotic henchmen acting as executioners.
And that was it.
And that's why we have a democracy, or a republic like ours has a criminal justice system the way it is, because it has to be a system of laws, not a system of vengeful psychotic individuals.
Right.
Because if you had a system to where, okay, you could inhumanely treat and just outright murder even psychopathic murderers, what would be there to stop that system from being abused to do this to innocent people? Which is precisely what Nazi Germany did. They declared certain people criminals and just acted as judge, jury, executioner. And of course, we can't have that in a democracy.
No, we can't have that in a democracy, and it's also why you actually made me think of a very interesting point. We have this system, like you mentioned, this criminal justice system. But when you think about how our system is supposed to work, and at the end of it, somebody can be executed by the state. The thing is that it's kind of the same thing as just summary executions by the government of Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just that we have a little more window dressing on ours.
Well, there is a due process involved.
That's what I'm saying, the window dressing.
Right.
So now the thing is that I don't, I've said this before, but you can, going back and forth on the death penalty and how you might feel about it, I think that's a personal thing. I don't think that everybody is solidly one way or the other. I do think that it's good to have debates. And other thing that I did appreciate about this movie is that it did not force the audience to choose a side. It lets you go with your own conclusions and your own emotions about how you would feel about it.
The movie essentially walked you through that process.
Right.
So, if you want to see how this process works in a typical Southern state, then Dead Man Walking is a very good movie to watch. It's very educational in that aspect.
Right. Right. And this is why, I try to remember that we're all human beings. Even the most disgusting person on the planet is a human being.
Yes, and whatever you do to that disgusting person, no matter how disgusting and dreadful and inhumane that person is, whatever you do to that person, you're inflicting upon yourself as well.
And you're going to have to live with it.
Yeah, which is why, of course, most people who are pro death penalty, in truth, wouldn't want to be the executioner.
And I'm also going to have some the pro-life crowd is going to have some shots fired at them. If you are pro-life, then you would also be against executions.
If you think if you think all human life is precious, then this is a belief that is based upon Christian beliefs, then you have to understand that God values all life, and all life has a purpose.
Right.
Everyone has a role to play.
Mm-hmm.
And if you arbitrarily judge someone and kill them, then you're interfering with God's judgment and God's plan, according to pretty much any set of Christian beliefs.
Right. And the other thing that I need to keep saying is that there are no rich people on death row. Okay. Death row happens to poor people only.
In Louisiana, especially.
Yes, or in the South, especially, I would say. Because, it's not just Louisiana. There's also Mississippi, Alabama. Georgia, I feel like, is getting a little bit better in general. That's what it feels like, because they're now becoming a swing state. And, the South can get better. This is why I'm excited that Georgia is a swing state. This is why I'm hoping that the death penalty abolishment in the state of Louisiana will go through. It might not, but I would really like for it to go through. I would love for the state to be an example.
Yeah, it's become very impractical. Now, I'm someone, yes, in my 20s and my 30s and my 40s especially, pretty much pro-death penalty. And it's never had anything to do with being a deterrent. Because it isn't a deterrent. There's no, if some sociopath or psychopath feels entitled to be able to break the law, there's no such a thing as a deterrent that's going to stop them. All there is punishment.
Right.
To quote Frank Castle, the Punisher, yes, punishment. That's what he says. He says it's punishment.
Right.
By necessity, of course, the need to separate someone who is a danger to society from society.
Right.
The best way to do that without causing harm to anyone, including society, including staining your own hands, scarring yourself mentally, is to permanently lock someone away.
Right. And, we certainly have plenty of prisons. We have plenty of room for murderers.
We do a good job incarcerating people in this country.
Yes, unfortunately.
Ironically, we do a better job of incarcerating people than Nazi Germany did. We're just more humane about it.
Yeah, well, we're not. Well, they're not just being slaughtered in the streets. Summarily executed,
or in internment camps under very inhumane medical conditions.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. So, Brian, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up this Patreon episode?
This movie is a shining example of a 4-star movie that does everything right, that very accurately depicts the subject matter, walking you through this criminal justice process and this religious process, and learning about not only how, in this case, the criminal justice process and the religious process both worked exactly as intended, but what this actually looks like when people are going through it.
Right.
And it's best to sit through a movie like this with a blank slate, with a non-judicial, judgmental viewpoint.
Right.
Which of course this movie is historic. And anytime one is studying history, it is best to do it with a non-judgmental viewpoint. In other words, don't take sides, so you can actually pay attention to all sides of whatever conflict is going on this in a historic movie, and you'll actually learn something.
Right. It's like, today we went and saw a movie, actually. Pronounce the title of it for me. Chevalier?
Yes.
Yeah, Chevalier.
Chevalier. Mm-hmm.
Which, what I was thinking when, at the end of the movie, is this is a lost part of Black history.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a part of Black history that has been neglected by everyone, overlooked by everyone, including the Black community, because essentially Chevalier was a French
violinist,
and also
composer.
a French composer, considered to be the Black Mozart, as he was the illegitimate child of between a nobleman and a slave woman, who had been sent away to a classical school,
right,
to work on a skill he already had, playing the violin.
Right. We're not gonna spoil it, but I'm sure it's gonna pop up on streaming soon. It was like a limited run in the movie theater or something.
Yeah, there's only 2 showings a day, I believe.
Yeah, so there's only a couple of showings, and when it does pop up on streaming, please watch it. It's very good. It's another one of those slow burn movies that builds up to something very emotional at the end.
Such rich detail involved in the set construction, the makeup, the costumes.
The costumes were amazing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful depiction of 1700s France.
Yes. Yeah, I very much enjoyed it. But this is what I mean, or what we mean when we say that, you've got to look at history, because, both sides, during the French Revolution, right? Both sides had their own interests. The peasants had their own interests, like as in they just wanted to be able to eat and live and not starve to death. And then, of course, the monarchy had their own interest, and that was to stay a monarchy.
To stay in power.
And
profit. Accumulate more wealth.
Right.
At the expense of anyone.
Oh, kind of like today in America.
Yes, except the impoverished in America are a bit more comfortable.
That's
and privileged true. Than they were in France at that time.
Yeah, but there's still problems, though. It's not as widespread, but there's still problems.
Yes,
definitely problems. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. This episode is going to be released on both Patreon and our regular podcast feed. Now, for our next Patreon discussion in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about Tim Burton's Batman.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
But known in many circles as the good Batman movie.
Shots fired at Christopher Nolan.
I liked Christopher Nolan's Batman movies. But,
yeah, so did I.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I like this one better.
Yeah, agreed. Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us. And we will resume our regular Murder and Mayhem on the podcast when we talk about again, I don't want to give it away because I don't want y'all Googling it, but it is going to be a mystery that, again, is just going to haunt me forever.
Oh.
Yes.
Yes. We're going to solve that mystery, right? Yeah.
I really wish we could.
Over the course of the episode, we solved that mystery.
I really wish we could.
Spoiler alert, just like any other podcast or documentary where a mystery is examined and analyzed, we're not going to solve the mystery. Sorry.
I wish we could, though.
Me too.
All right. Okay, dear listeners, have a great week, and we will talk at you soon. Bye.
Good night.